Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us on this Taxes 101, Helping the People You Serve Make the Most of Your Tax Time webinar. I did want to point out for everyone, all of our co-sponsors on this webinar. You can see the logos across the bottom of your screen, the University of Minnesota Extension, the Community Action Partnership here in Minnesota, Prepare and Prosper, and Legal Aid. So we want to thank all of the co-sponsors on the webinar. This webinar is actually part of a series of workshops and webinars, and so you can see we've had some workshops held in Rochester, Mankato, and the Twin Cities. Yesterday was our first webinar, and then today, January 21st, is our topic, and there is one more remaining webinar next week, the 27th, next Wednesday, so we encourage you to participate in that webinar as well on making the most of tax time and community resources. You can see at the bottom of this slide the helpminnesotasave.org website. All of the trainings and materials will be archived there, so we encourage you to go check those out on that web page. We have several presenters today. You can see on the far upper left my picture, Sarah Crymans, and I'm an extension educator with the University of Minnesota Extension. Becky Johnson, who is with Lakes and Prairies Community Action Program up in the Moorhead area, will be our second presenter. Claire Trolley, who is an attorney, will be our third presenter. Ellie McCann with the University of Minnesota Extension. This photo is on the bottom left, and she'll be sharing some parenting resources with us. And Taylor Putz, who is with the Claimant, he's the Claimant Campaign Manager with Prepare and Prosper, will be sharing some tax information as well. So those are the folks that you will be hearing from and interacting with today. So today on our webinar, we are going to be talking about and figuring out who can or should claim children when filing those taxes. As indicated, we will be identifying some communication strategies for families that you will be able to share with them, and then also becoming familiar with some of those tax filing resources that are available here in Minnesota. Throughout this webinar, we want you, our participants, to be engaged, and so there's a few things that we are hoping we will be able to have you participate in. The first are some chats, and you should hopefully see a chat box on the lower right-hand side of your screen. If you don't see that, there's probably a blue chat bubble up on the upper right-hand side of your screen that you can click on. And then when you are able to type into that box, there is a send to section right above that chat box. And if you click on the down arrow, there will be a list of participants, I believe, as well as everyone at the top. And so when you type into the chat box, make sure you are sending that to everyone, so everyone will be able to see and respond to your messages. We will also have an opportunity to participate in a couple of polls, and those will pop up on the screen, and we will give some instructions at that time. We will also have some opportunities for you to raise your hand because I think Ellie will be having some questions where she's asking people to raise your hand. Now, I want everybody to find the raise your hand symbol that is over on the right-hand side. If you are looking at the list of participants and then the chat section, so when you're looking at participants, at the bottom of the participants is a little raise your hand feature. So if people can find that and raise your hand. Thank you, Beth. All right, Becky has found it. So you need to be looking at the participant screen. Yes, Ellie has found it as well. And then there's a raise your hand section. So if we can have a few more people find that, Mary Ellen and Melanie and Robin are finding that, Megan as well. All right, So several people have found that raise your hand feature, and we will be using that. Go ahead and lower your hands now as we will be using that in a little bit. Thank you. So now we are going to do our first poll, and we're just curious who is with us on the webinar today. And so Mary Jo is going to attempt to pull up a poll here. And as you can see, we're curious who everybody is, if they are a VITA or free tax site volunteer, if they are a community action program staff, a community agency staff, work in higher education, or other. Now, Mary Jo is going to attempt to pull this in, and I am not seeing that happening right now. So we're going to have everybody respond to this question in the chat box. So go to the chat section, make sure you're sending to everyone. Oh, there's the poll. Yay, Mary Jo. Okay, so now on the right-hand side, you should see the chat. And you should be able to indicate who you are on there. So go ahead and indicate in the bubble who you are, and then hit the submit button, which is on the lower right-hand part of that screen. And we will just give folks a few seconds here to respond to that. Let's go ahead and share results so we can see who we have on the webinar. Perfect, thank you. So we have 2 VITA volunteers, we have 5 community action program staff, 5 community agency staff, 3 from higher education, and 10 with no answers. So that gives us a little bit of a feel of who we have. Thank you so much for participating in that poll. Okay, so now I am going to pass the ball to Becky Johnson as she helps set the stage for us.
Thank you. Hi, like she said, my name is Becky Johnson. I work for Lakes and Prairies Community Action in Moorhead, and I've worked with our VITA program for the last 6 years. This webinar came about through some discussion with the University of Minnesota Extension on some common themes that we've seen pop up throughout our filing seasons over the last several years, and they're things that are not necessarily addressed in our normal VITA volunteer training, and we felt were really important for our volunteers and for our staff to get a little more understanding on ways that we can help families address these issues ahead of time and have a better understanding of what we can do to handle them. So I'm just going to lay out a couple of situations here that we see, some scenarios. The first one is a mother comes into our VITA site to get her taxes prepared and filed. She answers all of the questions on the intake form regarding her dependent children, and the volunteer determines that she clearly has the right to claim her children because they lived with her the full year, with the exception of some occasional weekend visits with a non-custodial parent, and she provided all of the care and basic needs for these children throughout the whole year. She files electronically, and the return is rejected with the error message that these dependents have been claimed on another filer's return for this filing year. One that we see every once in a while. Next one, single father comes in to the VITA site to get his taxes prepared and filed. He answers the questions on the intake form, and it sounds as though he and the other parent have equal custody, shared 50-50 in both time and expense. He hasn't claimed the kids before, but wants to this year, and came in early in the season so that he could file before the other party. He was never married to the other parent and has no formal agreement on who claims the children. It's just that mom has claimed them in years prior, and he would really like to get in on some of those exemptions and the tax credits that are available when claiming children. And a third scenario, grandma and grandpa come in and indicate on their VITA intake form that they have 2 grandchildren that are dependents, and state that these grandchildren have resided in their care for 9 full months of the past year. The parents of these children have not been in contact or provided any financial or emotional support this entire time period. The grandparents have been fully supporting these children in every way. They file with the grandchildren as dependents, and it gets rejected due to another filer already claiming these dependents for this filing year, assuming one of the parents of the children have claimed them already. So we're going to have a little chat here and see if there are others in our group that have experienced similar situations where there have been disagreement or uncertainty on who should claim the children of the taxes. I know that a lot of times we are able to look in our 4012 and look at the decision tree and make a pretty clear-cut decision on who should claim the children, but there are times when it's just a little bit of a gray area, or we don't know that there's an issue until the reject comes back after we've tried to e-file it. So if you want to go ahead and in your chat box along the side there, go ahead and type in if you have any examples or stories that you would like to add on situations that you've seen pop up where this has been an issue. Sarah's wondering if there's ever issues with high school or college children who try to claim themselves and their parents also want to claim them. We definitely have questions about that every year too, especially with college kids who lived in an apartment on their own, but still had their parents paying a majority of their expenses through the year. That certainly comes up quite often. Anybody else have any stories you'd like to share or any situations? Yeah, Mary Jo talking about children who go into foster care and biological parents trying to still claim the children. Just another minute or so here to think of something if you have anything you'd like to add on this, and then we'll keep moving. And Jane says she works with many kinship families, those caring for others' children, and there's a lot of battles over tax issue. We need some clarification there. Thank you very much for your input on these. That's helpful to add to the discussion. So what happens? How does this impact families? You know, the families that we're working with in VITA sites are quite often families that are low income. They have multiple barriers. They have very intense needs for that money to come in and to come in a timely manner. So here are some of the ways that this impacts our families. When this happens and the parents or the grandparents, whoever should be claiming these children, attempt to do their e-filing, it gets rejected if the children have already been claimed by somebody else. So the second parent or grandparent's tax filing is rejected by the IRS. This can appear to the IRS as fraudulent activity as well. At this point in the story, the IRS is not able to determine which of the parents is fraudulently claiming the children. So it doesn't look good for the parent claiming them. The parent that should claim the children can still move forward with trying to claim their dependents, but they're going to have to file by paper rather than electronically. Obviously, that is a slower process. And once that has been filed, the IRS will investigate the claims by each party to determine who has the legal right to claim the dependents and receive the deductions for these kiddos. If the IRS determines that the person who originally claimed the dependents did not have the legal right to do so, they may have to repay the tax return money that they received in error. For the parent who did have the legal right to claim, their return is significantly delayed in getting processed and paid to them. So in most cases, both parties are going to be negatively impacted. The person who is trying to claim them without the right to do so, even though they initially get the money up front, they may really be impacted negatively as well. So it's really important that both parties understand who is going to claim the dependents, who has the right to, so that this doesn't end up gumming up the system, holding back returns that people are desperately waiting for, and having some negative consequences for the parent who shouldn't have filed. It can create further strained relationships between the parents as well as creating some financial instability for the family and the children who were counting on those funds to pay for basic necessities, as many of our VITA clients do. Additionally, for the VITA sites, this can have some negative impact for us running the sites as well, because the VITA program looks at our reject return rate. So if we have several of these coming in and they're getting turned away or getting rejected, it looks as though we are making mistakes as preparers. And that's one of the things that the IRS looks at if you're receiving a VITA grant through the IRS. So it can have some negative impacts on us when we're having our grants monitored and when applying for future funding opportunities. So I am going to go ahead and turn it over to Claire.
My name is Claire Trolley. I'm a family law attorney here in the Twin Cities, and we're going to be talking a little bit now about who can or who should be claiming the children when they're filing their taxes. And we're going to start by trying to do just another little poll here and see if that works. So we have always the mother, always the higher earner can claim the children, whoever your client is if you're the tax preparer. Only a judge can make this decision, or it completely depends on the circumstances. Yes, okay, so excellent. You caught my little joke with this poll here, that it completely depends on the circumstances. And I was being just a little facetious with the poll, but I think that it's important to kind of keep this in mind, because these are often common misconceptions that people have, that only the mother can claim the children, or only the person who earns more, or the parents have no control, that only a judge can make this decision. So often when parents are in this situation of determining who can claim the children, either because it's a recent separation or this is the first year another parent thinks maybe they will claim the child or the children, we usually fall into one of three different scenarios. Kind of the default scenario where the parents haven't talked, there's no agreement, and nothing has been entered by a court, or there is an agreement between the parents, or the parents have talked, there's no agreement, but now we have a court order. And then we'll be ending this section by just talking for just briefly about a few IRS considerations to think about while we're doing this. So first, the default position. Again, this just occurs when there's no agreement between the parents, either a formal or informal agreement. There's just been zero communication between the parents and nothing entered with the court. And so the default position is that the custodial parent will claim the child or the children on their taxes. And the custodial parent is the parent who has the children more than half of the time. And we'll talk at the end what happens if there is a true equal parenting time between parents. But for the most part, in most circumstances, there is one parent who has the children more than 50% of the time, even if it's like 55 or 60% of the time. Almost equal, but not quite. So the best case scenario that we can have is there's been communication and an agreement between parents. This is always best because parents can make their own unique agreement that works best for their family and their situation. There is kind of a standard agreement that often occurs between parents, and that is parents taking turns on claiming the children. And so there's a couple of different ways that parents can do this. Sometimes what they'll do is mom will claim all the kids, in even years, and dad will claim all the kids in odd years. Or sometimes if there's 2 children or 4 children, mom will claim one and dad will claim the other, or 2 and 2. Or if there's an odd number, they'll each claim one child and then switch off each year between claiming that third child. But there's always, just like with any agreement, parents can come up with unique ways of doing it. So sometimes you'll see situations where mom and dad get along just great, and they can look at their taxes every year and see who gets the bigger tax advantage from taking the child or the children. So they might have an agreement where it says mom gets the child in odd years and dad gets it in even years. And so if this was mom's year, and she'd get a $500 return claiming the child, but dad would get a $1,500 return then what they can agree to is that of that $1,500 return from Dad gives Mom the $500 right away because it's her year, and then they share the remaining $1,000. So they're both $500 better than if they had just been following the strict schedule. And of course, this only occurs in situations where Mom and Dad, or Mom and Mom, or Dad and Dad, or whoever get along really well. So not common, but certainly an option for parents. The other thing is often in agreements between parents, it's often contingent on being current with child support. So whoever is the obligor, the parent who is ordered to pay child support, they need to be current on their child support to have the right to claim the child or the children. And what I will often tell my clients is, if you know that Mom or Dad is behind on their child support, in October, send them an email or a text message and say, hey, you need to be current on your child support to claim the kids on taxes this year. And I'll give you till February 1st to be current, you know. And if they're not, then of course the other parent could claim the children even though it's not their year. But I always tell my parents to give that little heads up, and also, you know, if they're behind by less than a month, that's not being behind. They're still current if they're less than a month off just because of how paychecks work. So the third situation that we'll sometimes have is the parents weren't able to agree and it had to go to a judge to make this decision. We now have a new statute in Minnesota that just became effective August 1st, 2015. It's Minnesota Statute 518A.38, Subdivision 7. Prior to this, there wasn't something in the statute for judges to consider when determining who should have the child dependency, and they had just kind of followed whatever makes the most sense sort of guidelines. And the statute now does pretty much follow what makes the most sense for the family. So things that the judges will consider are the financial resources of each party, if there's a negative financial impact on not awarding the exemption, if one or both parents would receive a tax benefit, because sometimes, of course, if you don't receive a tax benefit, it doesn't make sense to give you the option of claiming the dependency, and also the impact of the dependency exemption and other parties' ability to claim a tax credit or subsidy under the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act, or Obamacare, or the Affordable Care Act, because sometimes that can play into how that works. So the other thing that I would just say with court orders is courts can certainly place a reasonable condition on the right to claim. That's often, again, being current with child support. The other thing is, if one parent has less than 10% parenting time, they will not be entitled to claim the child or the children unless the parties are in agreement. But they're not in agreement because it's gone to the judge. So that's certainly something to take into consideration. The other thing there are now some consequences if a parent is acting badly. So if they're violating the court order and claiming the children in a year they should not be claiming the children, they may be required to compensate the other party the difference in the tax refund, and potentially pay attorney's fees, which can be even more expensive. So there's some financial consequences, or some greater financial consequences of acting inappropriately. And so there was a question that I wanted to address earlier in the chat, just quickly before we finish with the IRS considerations. I think this came from Jane. Mary Jo wrote it. Says, I work with many kinship families, those caring for others' children, lots of battles over tax issues. I need clarification. The thing that I would just point out with this is this can be very, very difficult situation, because a lot of times when kids are are living in different households with different family members or with different friends of family, it's often not clear who had the kid for the majority of the year. because it's often not that, grandma or auntie or uncle cared for the child, more than 6 months of the year. It was they cared for them for a couple weeks in July, and then for the whole month of February, and then for 6 weeks in the winter, kind of back and forth. And so those situations are very difficult, and really the only kind of guidance that I can offer is to try and do the best communication between family members, to try and make it clear between family members what the plan is going to be. But that's not always possible. So I'm sorry I can't offer better clarification with that. But the one thing with the court order is kind of to do a takeaway with this is the judge is going to do what makes the most financial sense for the family. And so I think what judges probably will continue to do is alternate who has the right to claim the child or the children on their taxes with the person who owes child support to be current on their child support. I think that probably will continue for most cases. So just to wrap the section up for who should claim children, a few IRS considerations to think about. If parents are on a truly equal parenting time schedule with the children, the custodial parent is the parent with the higher adjusted gross income or the higher AGI. And so when I come into situations where the parents have an agreement with their divorce or their separation and they are on an equal schedule, what I will put in the vacation chart is I will add what's called a tax day. So the parent who, say mom is claiming Sophie every year and dad's claiming Jackson every year, well, on the tax day, mom will have Sophie for 1 extra day and dad will have Jackson for 1 extra day every year. So if there's ever a question with the IRS, that can show that mom did have Sophie for 1 extra day that year and dad had Jackson 1 extra day that year. And that can just be used as additional evidence if there is an audit or an issue with the IRS. The other thing to keep in mind is that if it is the non-custodial parent's year to claim the child, there is an additional IRS form to fill out. That's Form 8332. This form is filled out by the custodial parent saying, hey, other parent gets to claim the child or the children this year. And a judge will certainly order that the parents participate and comply with this. And finally, as we saw with the scenarios earlier that had been laid out, the issues with the IRS always arise when both parents try to claim the same child. And it's always the second parent to file who has the problem. And so when we have communication problems like that, well, what do we need? But we need communication strategies. And so I think Ellie can help us with the different communication strategies that we might be able to use when we have these problems.
Excellent. Thank you, Claire. And this is Ellie McCann. So let's talk about what are some communication strategies that can potentially be helpful to parents who are working through possibly some of these tax issues that Claire and Becky have both talked about. When issues oftentimes arise between co-parents, it's really important for them to remember that it's almost virtually impossible to have a cooperative co-parenting relationship if you're always in conflict with that other parent. Anger oftentimes can have a role in these conflict kinds of situations. And if a parent you are working with is angry and needs to communicate with the other parent about a tax issue, I would suggest that you suggest to that parent that they really wait, calm down, take a little bit of time before they send a communication to that other parent so that it's not filled with angry comments or angry text. Conflictual parenting is really the worst kind of parenting that a child can be involved in. And when they are, typically those children are really caught in the middle of what is happening between the parents. If the issue is a tax issue, it is very much a parent issue that the children should not be involved in, even by passing notes back and forth to each other. That can really be a big burden for children to carry, and that puts children in the middle where they do not belong. So it's important for parents to learn some strategies and how they can manage this conflict with the other parent, because the whole family is going to benefit. One source of anger that may stem from parents having different approaches and responses to conflict. So everybody, has different personalities and different ways they deal with conflict. As a professional, I'm curious to know, and I'd like you to raise your hand for this one, if you can find that button. Have you worked with parents where one parent is highly conflictual all the time, pretty much all the time, and the other parent is quite calm? So raise your hand if you have had, Claire has her hand up. Raise your hand for us if you have been in that situation. Okay, it looks like Beth, Kirsten, Melanie, Nancy, Sarah. All right, so some of us have had that experience, Robin, and this can be a really hard kind of dynamic to have when trying to solve issues, especially when there are finances attached to solving those problems. So let's continue to talk about some other ways that you can help parents go about problem solving. So even if you try to control your body language, sometimes how you're using your voice gives away how you're really feeling, right? It's not what you say, but usually it's how you say it. So good communication involves both verbal and nonverbal communication and is a critical component to a healthy co-parenting relationship. So I would suggest if you have parents who are in a lot of conflict, you can print off this slide or the information on here, have it hanging in your office as a visual to remind parents 60% of the information that they communicate, that we all communicate, is in how we say it. I also want you now to raise your hand if you felt a little bit tense when I used a more stern tone on the last slide. Did that take you by surprise at all? So a few of you just kind of felt that. So even in the tone, that's 30% of how communication comes across. So tell a parent that for a while, being extra cautious in how you react to the other parent's communication or how they present their information and how they communicate it might feel a little awkward or fake at first, but with practice, they'll hopefully start to feel kind of the benefits of some of their restrained efforts in trying to solve some of their problems. But the other part of communication really comes in listening. And remember, there are some really good characteristics to think about and remind parents about that you work with around being a good listener. One is be sure to get rid of distractions. Stop what you're doing before the conversation starts and remove any of those unnecessary background noises such as TV, radio, computer noises. And be sure to make eye contact with that other person. Boy, I know when somebody talks to me, if they are looking everywhere but me, I really feel like they're disconnected and we're not really engaged. Try to put the other speaker at ease with your nonverbal cues. So part of that is having a relaxed kind of posture. If you're feeling really on the defense, it's going to come across in your body language. Also concentrate on what you see and hear and not your own interpretation of the communication. So focus on what that other person is trying to get across to you. Watch for feelings, not facts, because those feelings could include the main message, okay? Demonstrate patience also. Try to hold your temper and try to hold your criticism while you are trying to solve a problem with the other parent. Technology is a way that many co-parents have really started communicating, and oftentimes this can work really well for co-parents and create kind of a business-like approach to their parenting. Co-parents might be able to explore a lot of different technology-based communication, like texting or email or social media to help stay connected. What I would like to do is in the chat box, I would like you to tell us, what do you think are some of the pros and what are some of the cons of communicating through technology? So if you could just use pro or con before each of your responses, that'll kind of signal to me which is which. Okay, so one of the pros, it's quick, it's easy. You pull out your phone, you maybe shoot a quick text. What might be another, a con, the tone is lost and you can't read the other person's body language. So that can really influence how you interpret what the message is, because that body language and that tone is taken out. Any other pros you can think of? I think one thing that I think of, the pro can also be that the tone is lost. That's great. Thank you, Beth. Definitely, because you don't have to worry about flying off the handle yourself and using that angry tone. You just send the text. Another con, typos can lead to confusion. Oh my goodness, doesn't this happen with any of us who text? But especially when it's a really important piece and you're trying to solve a problem. Another pro is you can message any time of day. I think Sarah had mentioned that in a private message to me, but you can message any time of day, but the con to that is to remember that the other person might not respond right away. And Beth kind of talked about that the person might not get the message or the message may be delayed. Another is that documentation. You will have that documentation. So whether you're emailing or texting, you will have that documentation of what that communication has been. And not being able to read the body language. You can really read into things, and things can be really misinterpreted. You guys are great. This is great. So you've really covered all of these pros and cons. And I think I just want to give a few warnings for you to think about as you work with parents who use technology. Using written communication can allow your words to carry more meaning. So it's important to ensure that you're communicating what you actually mean. So as someone had said above, Kirsten, that the typos can lead to confusion, encourage your parents, if they're going to use this type of technology, to proofread the message that they send to make sure it didn't autocorrect in a crazy way or whatever the case may be. Also, be sure to use the right communication tool for the right message and the right audience. One example is that if the other parent does not check email regularly, don't use email if you are expecting that response. Time-sensitive issues or complex issues should really use a more direct form of communication. And I would consider a tax issue a more complex issue. If you have a difficult conversation that really needs to take place with that other parent, try to have that conversation either face-to-face or in person. You can do face-to-face now through technology, but make sure that it's face-to-face. If you can do it in person, that is really the best. And set up a time to meet and discuss if needed. Complex issues are rarely solved with written words alone, and that is so important to remind your parents of. So if you're able to set up a meeting with the other parent, here are just a few business-like meeting rules for co-parents to think through. Set a time that you're both going to meet. One thing I ask parents when I teach parents forever is, where is it better to meet at one of your homes if there's a highly contested issue, or out in public somewhere. Raise your hand if you think you should be at one of the person's home, one of the parents' homes. All right, I saw one hand go up and then go down real quick. So I think you're all in agreement that when there is something that is pretty contested, parents should really meet in a public place, because that also helps them to keep their body language and tone in check. Set a time to start and end the meeting. Have a written list of what you want to talk about. I know I'm an emotional person, and when there are high emotions and high things at stake, such as finances, oftentimes you get there, you maybe have a flood of emotions, and you totally forget the big points that you wanted to make. So just make sure you write those down before the meeting. And use written methods, whether it's notes or emails, to document the decisions that you have made, save copies, and double check that both of you are in understanding. Okay? All right. And I'm going to turn this over to Taylor. Thank you.
Absolutely. Well, thank you. Thank you, everyone. I'll spend a few minutes going over what are some of the resources for parents, especially during tax time. So the first resource that I will talk about is the Claim It campaign. This is a statewide public awareness campaign created in 2006 to increase the utilization of the Earned Income Tax Credit and free tax preparation in Minnesota. So maybe you have seen the Claim It campaign, maybe you've seen it on the streets, on a billboard, or you might be someone who receives our materials and hands it out to parents so they can learn more about claiming the Earned Income Tax Credit and filing their taxes for free. Maybe you've also seen us on the news. If you'd like to order some free outreach materials for the 2016 tax season, you can go to www.uclaimit.org. So what is the Earned Income Tax Credit, and why is it so important for parents, especially low to moderate income taxpayers? So significantly, it's for families who work. You must have earned income to receive the Earned Income Tax Credit, anywhere from $2 up until $53,267. You must have a Social Security number. You must be between the ages of 25 and 65, and you have to meet the income and family size guidelines listed below in the table. So it's significantly important, right? Because a family that works, making maybe under $53,000, that has 3 or more children, can get up to $6,242 at tax time. So there are actually people who are missing out. There are parents who are missing out on this tax credit. The IRS determines that 1 in 5 eligible taxpayers are missing out on claiming the Earned Income Tax Credit. So as you're working with parents, the IRS has suggested these are the type of people who are more likely to miss out. They're people living in rural areas. Maybe the closest tax site is far away and they decide not to file taxes. They might be self-employed and have really complicated tax returns. They might have a disability or have a child with a disability. They're without a qualifying child, so they're a single person. They have limited English proficiency. They're worried about going into a tax site and no one being able to speak their language. They could be grandparents raising grandchildren. And they recently experienced changes to their marital, financial, or parental status. So 1 year, someone could have 1 child and is not eligible for the Earned Income Tax Credit with their income, but the next year they could be eligible if they have a child, another child. So I'm not going to dive deep into tax credits, but I want to draw your attention to a resource called the Claim It Tax Credit Guide. This is available online. You can also order some of these booklets from me, and I can send them to you. But they're an awesome resource to go over different tax credits, like the Earned Income Tax Credit. The state's version of that is called the Working Family Credit, the Renter's Credit. So if someone rents, they can get a renter's refund. Child Tax Credit. If you have a child, you might be able to get the Child Tax Credit. If a parent has a child in K through 12, and they're buying school supplies or purchasing tuition for an after-school educational program or even a summer camp, they could potentially receive the K through 12 education credit or the K through 12 subtraction depending on their income. There's also some education credits for parents whose students are in secondary education, and then those paying for childcare, and there's many more. So, what is free tax preparation? In Minnesota, we have 290 free tax preparation sites. And at all of the tax preparation sites, there are volunteers who are IRS certified and really want to spend their time dedicated to helping taxpayers get their maximum refund. And at free tax preparation sites, there's no hidden fees. A lot of taxpayers, when you encourage them to go file their taxes for free, they're like, well, what's the gimmick? There is no gimmick. Free means free. Also, another perception out there is, well, if I file my taxes for free, I'm not going to get my refund very fast. I'd rather go to H&R Block. However, e-file is available at free tax preparation sites, which allows taxpayers to get their refund quickly. So where can parents find the closest free tax preparation site nearest them? They can go to the Claim It website, click on the link that says File Your Taxes for Free, and then type in their zip code to find the closest free tax preparation site nearest them. If you know someone who maybe would like to file their taxes online but wants to file for free, they can use myfreetaxes.com. They can actually use that today. And it's for individuals and households who made under $62,000. It's great for returns that are out of scope for VITA. So usually VITA, volunteer income tax assistance sites, they're a type of free tax preparation site, have eligibility requirements, individuals who make under $35,000 and families who make under $55,000. So if you have a household that made $60,000 and they want to file their taxes for free, My Free Taxes is for them.
Thank you, Taylor. Thank you. This is Sarah again. So we have covered a lot of information from the scenarios that Becky presented at the beginning and the legal information that Claire shared, as well as the communication parenting pieces that Ellie talked about, and then the wealth of resources that Taylor shared. So now we'd like to open it up if there are any questions that folks have, and I know there were a few in the chat box, so as people are thinking of additional questions they would like to ask, we're going to jump back and address a few of these. I know Claire is prepared to perhaps respond to these. So one from Mary was, what if a child was in foster care for the year? Claire, can you help us out with that one?
Well, this is Claire again. The question with foster care is always just a little bit tricky. Because, of course, kind of the general standard is a parent can claim a child if the child is with them more than half the time for more than half the year, and they've provided a financial assistance to the child, right? And so if the kid's living with you for more than half the time, more than half the year, of course you've provided financial assistance. If the child is out of your home for the entire year, I would say probably as a general rule you do not have the right to claim the child, but I would check with the tax preparer. Because while I know a lot of general things about taxes, I am not a tax expert like a CPA might be. And so I would check with that on the foster care issue, just because my gut says you probably don't have the right if the child's been out of your home for the entire year, but to just check on that to double make sure that I'm correct. And then I saw there was another question about a change in custody that just happened recently with a court order, and the judge had not addressed the issue of taxes. And so what I would say is if the parents are able to communicate using the communication skills that Ellie had laid out, the first step should be the parents should try and work it out themselves. And if that is not possible, or if that communication fails, it sounds like the person you had been working with had custody for 2015 and should be the one who should be able to claim the child for 2015. Maybe not 2016, but it sounds like probably 2015. But that's hard to provide exact information without getting a lot more facts. And so, Mary, if you have additional questions or would like to follow up with me after this seminar, I think my email will show up at the end of the slide, and feel free to email me and we can follow up in a little more depth on this question or any other questions that come up with legal or custody questions. Please feel free to email me.
Thank you, Claire. What if a family provided foster care, so they were the foster care parents? Are they able to claim some of the credits or claim the children? Taylor or Claire, are you aware of that if a family serves as that foster care family?
I would say it depends on where we are in the foster care process and for how long the family had the child in foster care. A lot of times with foster care, it's not necessarily a long-term placement. It's for a few weeks or a few months. And certainly in that situation, you wouldn't be eligible if the child was with you for 2 months of the year. But if there was actually a court order that has changed custody and now you are the custodial parent of the child, so there's a court order that says, you know, grandma has custody of the child and you have parenting time for the majority, I would say you probably do have the right to claim the child. But again, communication is key here between who else might try to claim the child or to claim some of the other tax benefits in addition to claiming the dependency exemption. And I see there's another question from Mary Jo. Grandmother has court-ordered legal and physical custody. Child lives with aunt for 11 months of the year. Grandmother takes the child back in December. So can I claim the tax deduction? The aunt has documentation of receiving county benefits January through November of that year. You know, Janet, I would say that probably aunt has the right to claim the child, even though grandmother has court-order custody. And this is going to be a tricky situation, and probably the IRS will get involved in a situation like this if grandma and aunt both try to claim the child. But if aunt has that documentation saying the kid was with me for most of the year, even though grandma has that court order, I would say aunt probably has the right. But it's going to be a tricky situation if grandma and aunt can't by themselves decide how to handle the tax situation.
Thank you so much, Claire. All right, we're going to look at just a few more items of interest here, some additional resources. We saw some of these URLs earlier, but the youclaimit.org that Taylor'd spoken of. The University of Minnesota Extension Center for Family Development has some work and taxes resources at that second URL. And then the third one is the site for the Parents Forever program that Ellie spoke about. So you'll find some communication resources and other great resources for divorcing, never married, parenting apart types of situations. So some great resources there. As we indicated at the beginning of the webinar, the recorded webinar will be available at helpminnesotasave.org. So if you want to listen to this again, or if you have colleagues that you think might benefit from this webinar, definitely refer them to helpminnesotasave.org. Those of you that are in need of CEUs for social work, or AFCs, that's Accredited Financial Counselors from the Association for Financial Counseling and Planning Education. So social workers and AFCs, if you are interested in CEUs, please email Mary Jo Kotras, and you can see her email there. Mary Jo, if I can have you put your email into the chat box again, because I'm going to leave this slide here. But CEUs, contact Mary Jo. We are also going to be emailing a webinar evaluation to all participants. So when that shows up in your email box, we please ask or beg of you to complete that very short webinar, because that is how our coalition or our collaboration of sponsors help document the work that we're doing, so that hopefully we continue that again in the future. As promised, here's the contact information for all of the presenters. So we have emails, phone numbers for everybody. So if you have questions or would like to follow up with people, please give us a call or send us an email, and we will do our best to help you out. We want to thank everybody again for participating in this webinar, and we encourage you to participate in the final webinar, which will be held next Wednesday, January 27th, and that's on making the most of tax time and community resources. So we hope to see you there. Thank you so much, everybody, and have a great day.